secret bunker somewhere outside of Nashville, Tennessee. This is the award-winning podcast, ParaReality.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for listening tonight. My name, of course, is Sandman, and I'll be your guide through this strange realm of ghosts, cryptids, UFOs, aliens, conspiracy theories, and other unsolved mysteries that I like to call ParaReality. Well, the emergence of COVID-19 and the ensuing pandemic's it's just about got all of us scared out of our freaking minds, right? After all, this is a new virus, something that we've never seen before, and we have no immunity against it, no vaccine for it, and seemingly no way to effectively fight it except for to lock ourselves indoors and avoid all contact with others. Yeah, this is a new and it's a deadly virus. But what about old viruses? And no, I'm not just talking about the flu and chickenpox. I'm talking about something much, much older. Ancient, in fact. There are viruses that are so old, we don't even know what they are or what they'll do. Lying in the permafrost beneath Antarctica are viruses that haven't seen the light of day in millennia. We don't really know what they are exactly or what they'll do to us, but it's a safe bet that whatever it isn't good. On tonight's journey into the realm of ParaReality, I'm going to continue the deadly virus theme, except this time I'm not going to be talking about COVID-19. No, loyal listeners, instead I'm going to be talking about something more ancient, something that the human race hasn't been exposed to in thousands, possibly millions of years. Tonight, loyal listeners, I'm going to be talking about ancient viruses that are lying just beneath the frozen surface of the ground in places like Antarctica. But to learn more, you'll need to tune in, and find out. However, before we begin tonight's journey, let me tell you how you can contact me here at the podcast, because there are several different ways that you can do that, and here they are. First of all, you can email the show. Email address is sandman@parareality.com. That's sandman@parareality.com. Second, you can find me on Facebook by going to my ParaReality page there on Facebook. And third, you can follow me on Twitter. My username is @ParaRealRadio. That's @ParaRealRadio. And lastly, you can always call the show at 615-692-1170 and leave a message on the studio line. I'm in the studio a lot these days working on the podcast, so you never know. I just might answer the phone, get a chance to talk to me. Like I said, you never know. But if I'm not there and you do decide to leave me a message, just be aware that if you do, you're giving me permission to play your comment back on the show. So if you don't want that to happen, you'll need to let me know somewhere in the message. Just let me know, hey, I don't want this played back. Otherwise, there's a really good chance that you'll get your show played back, or your message played back on the show. And I'm always looking for interesting stories for the podcast. So if you've got a story that you'd like to get on the show and you want it out there, tell it to me over the voicemail if you want to. If you don't want to, I don't know, maybe you don't want to be on the show, but maybe you just want to get your story in. You want to remain anonymous, that's fine. You can totally do that. Just leave me a message on the voicemail. If you run out of time, just call back and pick up where you left off. And that number to call, once again, is 615-692-1170, 615-692-1170. That is the ParaReality studio line. You can also email the show, sandman@parareality.com. Follow me on Facebook on the ParaReality page there on Facebook. And follow me on Twitter. My handle on Twitter is at ParaRealRadio. That's at ParaRealRadio. Or you can just check the show out on the web if you just want to check it out and see what it's all about. www.ParaReality.com. I said those are all the ways that you can contact me, get in touch with me here on the show. And as always, it is time for the fan mail of the week. And this one is, speaking of the studio line, this one comes from the studio line, right, fresh off the studio line. Now, it may sound a little weird, a little choppy, because I did some editing. I cut out some use of last names and email addresses and telephone numbers that were handed out on the studio line. Just be advised, if you want to leave me ways to get in contact with you, if you call the studio line, I will not play those back on the air. I am not that much of a jerk where I'm going to give out your personal contact information to the whole world. I know better than to do that. That's not cool. So I will edit those out, as can be heard in this message from listener of the show, Trey. And this is Trey's message that he left to me here on the studio line.
Yeah, Sam, man, my name is Trey. You responded to an email of mine, and I never did. I sent you a message back that you said you used part of my stuff about. Anyway, it was an outline of stuff I had. But anyway, my email is. I was just checking back with you because I was interested in what part of the stuff I sent you and you told me a date when it would air, the podcast would air, and I'm going to try to catch that. But I was just wondering what part of it you used, and just let you know that I do background music that's totally not got any copyright problems with it. It's instrumental. And I also have whole lots of ideas about conspiracies and stuff like that. I'm not real sure if it's paranormal, but some stuff about, how religion is warped, and our true history of, say, Northern European people has been, hidden from us, and so forth, and, plans for the overpopulation of the earth and what that has to do with religion and all that kind of stuff. So I have a lot of material. I haven't done a podcast of my own. I really need to do that. Just kind of interested in what part you did in case I don't have a chance to. I guess I can hear that podcast anytime after it airs. So thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. That was listener of the show, Trey, leaving me a voicemail. Now, Trey, I have since he left this voicemail, I have been in contact with him over through the email. So some of this Trey already knows. But Trey, just in case you need refreshing, the episode that you were talking about where I read part of your manifesto was on the February 21st, 2020 episode where part-time co-host Eric and I were talking about the Epstein conspiracy theories. I guess you could say it was part 2 of our Epstein conspiracy theories, and that was on February 21st, 2020, where I read part of your manifesto. And, well, buddy, you're like me, you got a lot of interests, and I appreciate you calling and leaving me the message, and I appreciate all the emails that you have sent me. I'm definitely looking over your stuff, and it's something very interesting. I don't know that I would necessarily need to use any of the music that you say you do, but I haven't heard it either, and I appreciate you offering to let me use some of your music. I would like to hear it. If you can, I don't know, email me some samples or something like that, sandban@ParaReality.com. That'd be cool if you could do that. But yeah, man, we've exchanged a few emails, Trey, and definitely have read over your stuff, and it's It's kind of out there, but yeah, I kind of understand what you're saying about you thinking about some things have been kept from us historically. I totally agree with you on that. I think my friend Scott, I say my friend Scott Walter, like he and I are buds. I've interviewed Scott Walter from America Unearthed, and I think he would totally agree with you on that. So yeah, Trey, thanks for calling in and leaving the message. And yeah, I'll definitely be getting back with you. And once again, that episode that you're looking for was the Epstein Conspiracy Theories Part 2 that aired on February 20th of 2020 with part-time co-host Eric. So thanks again, Trey, for calling. All right, that does it with the fan mail section. And now it's time to get into the heart of the show, and kind of keeping with the theme that I've done over the last couple of episodes with viruses. The last two, if you've listened to the last couple of episodes, you know they've been pretty much devoted exclusively to the COVID-19, which at first was called, it was a novel coronavirus, 2019 nCoV, and then later on developed into what we're now calling COVID-19. And I thought I would just kind of keep with the theme of the viruses and talk a little bit about what would happen if we were to unleash some, I guess, old viruses would be a good term to use. We all know that the earth is warming up, and it doesn't matter if you don't believe in global warming or not. The facts are the facts. Setting my own personal beliefs aside, I cannot ignore that the climate is changing, and not necessarily in a good way. The warming of the planet is causing more than just temperature change. The ice is also thawing, and scientists are sounding the alarm that we could see the re-emergence of ancient pathogens that haven't been active for quite literally thousands, or if not millions, of years. These viruses have been locked away in glaciers, and permafrost could suddenly wake up if they thaw. Considering our current pandemic, this is a scary thought, and one that could be actually on the verge of taking place sooner rather than later, especially given the rate that our planet is warming up. Frozen permafrost soil is the perfect place for bacteria to remain alive for very long periods of time, perhaps as long as millions of years. That means that melting ice could potentially open a Pandora's box of diseases. The temperature in the Arctic Circle is rising quickly, about 3 times faster than the rest of the world, as a matter of fact. And as the ice and the permafrost melt, dangerous pathogens could be released. Earlier this year, scientists analyzed 2 ice core samples from the Galia ice cap, which is in Tibet, and they identified several viruses that have been frozen, for lack of a better word. One of them dated back 520 years, and another dated back 15,000 years. Of all the viruses that were found, 4 of them are already known, but 28 have never been seen by modern man, at least before. Well, like I said, at least not for several hundred years anyway, right? And so that means that these pathogens are now exposed to the modern era, and that theoretically they can reemerge as viable viruses, exposing the planet to pathogens that we don't have the immune system for. Doesn't that sound a little familiar? Like COVID-19, like what's going on like right now? I mean, if it doesn't sound familiar, it should, because that's kind of exactly what's happening to the planet right now. We're right in the middle of a viral pandemic of a pathogen that we have never seen before and don't have the antibodies against it. The worst case scenario is that as the glaciers and the permafrost melt, it could cause the release of pathogens that have been frozen and preserved for tens of thousands, or to tens to hundreds, or 10 to thousands, or 100,000s of years. That can cause another pandemic, one far worse than what we're going through right now, as a matter of fact. While we don't know if this will happen, scientists have previously revived viruses that have been dormant for thousands of years, suggesting to me that it's at least a possibility. Throughout history, humans have existed side by side with bacteria and viruses. We've evolved to resist them, and in response, they have developed new ways of infecting us. Ever since Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin, we have had antibiotics, and we've used these antibiotics successfully, sometimes maybe a little too successfully. Thanks in part to overprescription of antibiotics, bacteria have responded by evolving to resist these things. And we keep coming up with new antibiotics. Patients keep on demanding them. Doctors overprescribe them and prescribe them when they shouldn't. And the bacteria evolve to become resistant to them. It's like a never-ending cycle. But what would happen if the human race were suddenly exposed to deadly bacteria and viruses that had been absent for thousands of years, stuff we haven't been exposed to for thousands of years? For example, let's take a look at what happened in Siberia back in August of 2016. In the Yamal Peninsula, which is located in a remote corner of Siberia, a 12-year-old boy died, and at least 20 other people were hospitalized after being infected by anthrax. Now, you might be saying to yourself, that's terrible, but hasn't anthrax been around for a long time? Well, yeah, it has, but listen to this. The theory here is that over 75 years ago, a reindeer infected with anthrax died, and its frozen carcass became trapped under a layer of the permafrost. And it stayed there until a heat wave in the summer of 2016 when the permafrost thawed. The reindeer's corpse was now exposed, and the anthrax was released into the water table and the soil, and somehow made its way into the food supply. And then more than 2,000 reindeer who were grazing nearby became infected, which then led to the small number of human cases. While it's true that anthrax has been around for a long time, it's also true that it becomes dormant if it's frozen. And once it's thawed, it can be just as deadly as it was before it became frozen. Therefore, if anthrax can be frozen and then thawed and still be just as deadly as it once was, couldn't the same thing be true of pathogens that we don't know anything about because they've been frozen for so long? Well, yes, it is a very distinct possibility. For centuries, people and animals have been buried in the permafrost, so it's not too far-fetched to think that dangerous pathogens could be unleashed once they're thawed. For example, in Alaska, scientists discovered fragments of RNA from the 1918 Spanish flu virus in corpses that were buried in mass graves. Corpses infected with smallpox and the bubonic plague are also probably buried in the aforementioned Siberia. So in the 1890s, there was a major epidemic of smallpox in Siberia. One town that it had approximately 40% of its population die from this disease. Their bodies were taken to the Kolyma River, and buried there on its banks under the upper layer of the permafrost. Now you fast forward to today, and the Columbus floodwaters have started eroding the banks, and the melting of the permafrost has speeded up this erosion process. All of those smallpox-ridden bodies are just waiting to be uncovered. And what happens when they are? Well, my bet is that we'll see an outbreak of smallpox in Siberia. We thought that we had, quote-unquote, defeated smallpox decades ago, and we don't even vaccinate people against it anymore. So what happens when it reemerges? Now, I know that there's smallpox vaccine on hand, but we don't have a lot of it on hand. We keep a small sample of it, around just in case it decides to come back. But people think that smallpox has been eradicated. What if really it hasn't, though? And sometime in the 1990s, scientists from the State Research Center of Virology and Bacteriology in Novosibirsk tested the remains of Stone Age people who had been found in southern Siberia. You notice how Siberia keeps popping up. They found these corpses in southern Siberia in the region of Gormy-Atali. And they've also tested samples from the corpses of men who had died during viral pandemics in the 19th century and were buried in the Russian permafrost. And what they found were bodies with sores that were characteristic to the marks left by smallpox. However, they didn't find the smallpox virus itself, but they did detect fragments of its DNA. So, could ancient viruses pose a public health risk? Well, the answer is maybe. The truth is that we just don't really know. If some of these ancient viruses are released back into the world, they could be ones that we already know, like the aforementioned smallpox there. And as I already said, we think that we've eradicated that disease, but there's always a possibility that it could make a comeback. There could also be viruses that modern medicine isn't aware of. Awful viruses that caused animal or human eradications in the past. The same's true of pathogenic bacteria like those that cause anthrax. Research has shown that providing the conditions are right, viruses can survive unperturbed for tens of thousands of years, possibly going back as far as the Neanderthal era. In a 2014 paper, a professor of genomics and bioinformatics at Aix-Marseille University in France, his name is Jean-Michaelclaverie. Dr. Jean-Michaelclaverie described a 30,000-year-old giant virus that had been eradicated from the Siberian permafrost. He took it up to his lab and he revived it, where it became infectious again after being dormant for a millennia. Now, giant viruses like these get their names because they're so large they can be easily viewed under a light microscope. While an average virus can be as small as 20 nanometers, a giant virus can't fit through a hole that's 200 nanometers or smaller. The one discovered in 2014, and I'm gonna try to pronounce this without screwing it up so bad. The one discovered in 2014 has been named Pathovirus sibiricum. Pithos is the name of a large storage container used by the ancient Greeks. Pathovirus sibiricum. And since then, Dr. Clavier's team has discovered at least one other giant virus, Malavirus sibiricum, and it was found in the same 30,000-year-old ice sample. Fortunately, though, for us, both viruses only attacked amoebas. And you know what an amoeba is. It's a single-celled organism with the ability to shapeshift, for just the KISS method, right? And so those viruses, both of those, they only attack amoebas and not animals or humans. This means that its resurrection of sorts didn't pose a public health risk. However, researchers say their existence raises the question of whether more deadly pathogens may be waiting in the permafrost, ready to reactivate. Bacteria can also survive after being frozen. In 2005, NASA scientists successfully revived bacteria that had been encased in a frozen pond in Alaska for 32,000 years. The microbes called, I'm going to try not to screw this up, Carnobacterium Pleistocernum, have been frozen since the Pleistocene era. When woolly mammoths were roaming around, that's how long it's been. And once the ice melted, the bacteria began swimming around like they were, not effective. Like, hey, what's up? We've been sleeping for a few millennia, and now we're awake. Let's get to work. And then in 2007, scientists managed to revive an 8 million old bacterium that had been lying dormant in ice beneath the surface of a glacier in the Beacon and Mullins valleys of Antarctica. In the same study, bacteria were also revived from the ice that were over 100,000 years old. But not all bacteria can come back to life after being frozen in permafrost, though. Anthrax bacteria can do this because they form spores, which are extremely tough. They're hardy, and they can survive frozen for longer than a century. Other bacteria that can form spores and can survive in the permafrost include tetanus and Clostridium botulism. That's the pathogen that's responsible for botulism. That's a rare illness that can cause paralysis and is oftentimes fatal. Some fungi can also survive in permafrost for a very long period of time. So permafrost covers about 24% of the northern hemisphere. That's about 9 million square miles. That's a lot of land. It's a lot of permafrost. And scientists are predicting that even if we were to limit warming to the 2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial levels, that we would eventually lose 40% of that 9 million square miles. And the 2 degrees Celsius is that's a key to global warming. If we can keep the warming, if we can limit it to less than 2 degrees or no more than 2 degrees, we will be able to lessen the damage that's done to our planet. If it goes above that, it's pretty much like Katie barred the doors. They say we don't really know exactly what's going to happen, but whatever it is, it's going to be bad. They have all these prediction models of how all the glaciers will melt and the ocean waters will rise and all these oceanfront cities and towns and everything will be flooded, and there'll be more water, less land, and more people with less resources, which is a bad thing. But anyway, I digress on that. Sorry about that. So as the permafrost thaws, these now covered landscapes are turning from carbon sinks into carbon emitters, with the potential to release vast amounts of greenhouse gases and cause the infrastructure it supports to crumble. Getting back to what I was just saying just a minute ago. And this warming could also unlock viruses currently hidden in the ice and in the permafrost. Now, though the likelihood